The presentation today is about how we have celebrated Christmas in this very church over time. And I am delighted to do it. So this time of year, we honor our Universalist roots by celebrating the Christian holiday of Christmas, the hanging of the greens, the tree, the children's pageant, and of course, tomorrow night, Santa, and cookies, cookies, cookies. So what was it like, the first Christmas in this sanctuary? If we were here, what and who would we have seen? There aren't any photographs and really no firsthand memories, but I invite you to imagine. The church was finished being built in 1881, was dedicated in March of 1882. This is a 1929 picture, but it probably looked very much like this with wooden stairs in the front. So this is the first Christmas, 1882. The new building, being inside here, our own building, which was free and clear at the time of the dedication, thanks to Baptists and Methodists as well. It's a big step up from meeting outdoors, in the schoolhouse, in somebody's home. So it is our place. The person leading the service would have been the Reverend William Looker Gibbs, a minister who served here for about 40 years, I believe. So he and Mrs. Gibbs came up from Somerset on the train, and they walked over to a family, the North family, and stayed over with them. So tomorrow, after the service, they will go back and get on the train and go back to Somerset. So now, it's cold and dark outside, but in here it's light and warm, with heat coming from the furnace downstairs via a very large cast iron grate in the center of the aisle. Can you see it? That's how we heated the sanctuary. It what? It is? Oh, that's something we should bring in. So sitting in the sanctuary here are the men who built the church. James Loomis, Burr Tuthill, and Mr. Marsh. There are the Stahl brothers, William, Henry, Peter, and Frank, along with Irv McCready and George Werner Jr. They were the masons who were in charge of the bricklaying and were very proud of their work. Other members that you would have seen sitting here are these: Anson Delamater and Mary Jane Marsh Gates and Hiram Tuthill and Samuel T. Marsh. So they would have been sitting here somewhere, wondering who we'd be so many years later. So, and we are blessed, by the way, to have descendants. I need to go back one. We are blessed to have descendants of these pioneers in our midst, and they are with us today. So Carol Hartza, for instance, and I would mention Joanne and Jackie and Gordon's family. Very nice. But what about the tree? As I researched this, I thought maybe not, because at this time of year, bringing a tree indoors wasn't popular yet. However, hanging of the greens was common long before Christianity. Ancient people hung evergreen boughs to keep away witches, ghosts, evil spirits, and illness. As late as the 1840s, the tree was seen as a pagan symbol. But this all changed when Queen Victoria was ruling in England, and she brought a tree into the royal palace because her husband was German, Albert. And in Germany, Christmas trees indoors were common. So she adopted his tradition. And just 10 years after that, now we would have an indoor tree, and it would be popular. It would be decorated with popcorn and berries and nuts and maybe candles. More about that later. So is there a children's pageant? We don't know. Back then, children were seldom mentioned, since only adult members have been recorded, as far as I've been able to find. But one thing we can be sure of is that after the service, there would be treats. Because, and this is where I wanted this one, the Ladies' Aid Society had been in business already for 13 years before the church opened. Now, these aren't the original members, but they are happy Ladies' Aid people, and they have always taken care of the church. So moving into the 1930s and 40s, our minister would be the Reverend Dr. Case or the Reverend Bodell, Willard Bodell, which some people remember. By now, there is a tree every year, and it's a very particular one. It's a tall red cedar tree that's cut from Wes Smith's property. It has electric lights. It is very prickly, and Joanne Bernstein still chuckles when she thinks about how hard it was to clean up all those needles at the end. Thank you. And then there is the pageant. So all the practice for the pageant took place over at the schoolhouse. And the children practiced over there, and then came here to do the pageant. So these pictures are both downstairs, and you can see the names of the people on our history wall. So I tried to imagine what it would be like. The teacher, maybe Mrs. Batten or Miss Hesselschwart, rehearsed the play and hymns until everyone had everything memorized. Meanwhile, she was managing 8 grades of children in one room. She was stoking the fire. She was keeping the boys from throwing snow on the girls' outhouse when they were using it. And rescuing kids who just had to put their tongue on the frozen pump handle where it got stuck. I have to reveal that 2 of those kids were Jackie Ellerthorpe and Carol Hartsuff. I know. But today is the day. The church is packed. Look up in front. There's a wire that stretches from over here by where our piano is now all the way to this side of the church. And hanging on it is a long blue denim curtain. The children are gathered downstairs, and we can hear them sort of rustling with anticipation. But now it's time for their part in the pageant, and they come up the stairs over where the piano is now. There were stairs from down below up here. And they come in, and with some wrangling, the curtain opens, and behold the nativity scene. So this is one of them. I don't have dates on some of these things, but young kids performed, and older kids performed as well. Sometimes it was just the children, and sometimes they engaged the congregation. Mabel Bernstein sat over here with the piano and played it joyfully, and the children sang. The story is traditional, but the performance is always its own story. The heavy curtain sags in the middle. The shepherds lose their hooks, and the wise men's beards aren't right and go off to the side. So there's always hilarious, loving laughter throughout the church, like there was last Sunday for us. One pageant that we have done is Santa Lucia. That was relatively recently, last 20 years, something like that. And then after the pageant, there's the sound of sleigh bells outside. And we all know what that means. There were doors here that closed the sanctuary off from the foyer at one time, and those would be closed, but behind them we would hear a thunk. Santa had arrived. So he comes down the aisle with a little box of hard candy for each child. And for years, Santa was Tom Bowen, who Wes tells me was Mr. Christmas, and then early before him it was Willis Smith, and then I think George Haynes has been Santa as well, has he not? No? Well, somebody's doing it now, I don't know who it is. So it was wonderful. Aren't these great pictures? Yeah. So it's told that Tom Bowen started the practice of the piñata, and Vicki Haynes has gotten us a piñata for tomorrow night where the kids can whack at it and reveal the candy or whatever is in it. So moving closer in time, some people recalled a pageant in the 1980s when the church almost burned down. This is the candle story. Children in religious education had made candles, and Ben Marshall wanted his candle to have 3 wicks on it, not just 1. So as I understand it, during the pageant, he carried it up on the stage, and the straw in the manger caught fire. Richard Meyer, who was a tall man, 6'5", leaped up to douse the fire. Gretchen watched with horror because Richard had had a heart attack not that long ago, and she thought he was having another one. It didn't occur to her until after that he was saving us from being burned down. So, And in the 90s, it happened again. Lit candles, straw, fire, to everyone's surprise, and George Haynes jumped up, Peg Beeson remembers, to put it out. So you'll notice now that in the pageant, we have no lit candles, and we have a handy fire extinguisher. Thank you, Gordon Bernstein. Yeah, so all things to remember. This is Gordon's father, Gordon L. Bernstein. He was an important man in the congregation, and as I understand it from some good sources, when he was a kid, he was a real pistol. Gordon has a story about his dad and the pageant, and I'm asking him to share it.
I want to start by apologizing because some of you may have already heard this story and you're going to get it again. Ann had asked me if I had any Christmas-type memories from when I was a kid, and I didn't really come up with any, but I said, man, my dad's story is a pretty good one. And in one Christmas Eve program, would have been during the World War II years. My dad was maybe somewhere between 6 and 10 years old. The kids all started in the schoolhouse with a candle, another flame story, and they were to come from the schoolhouse, up the steps, through the doors, and then line up in front, and they started singing as they left that building and sang all the way over, carrying their candles, and sang all the way up front and continue singing once they were in front. Christmas Day, somebody had come back, and maybe there was service that day, that morning, I don't know, but had noticed that in the snow from the schoolhouse and up the steps were red blotches in the snow. So they started down the phone tree to see which kid had slipped and crashed on the ice and had been bleeding on the trip from the schoolhouse to here. My dad, being the last one in the procession, Grandma got the last phone call. They started at the front, worked their way to their back. So Grandma gets the call. She finds out somebody was injured in the processional and calls my dad. Hey, come here. Yeah, what's up? He says, were you hurt last night in the walk from the schoolhouse to the church? My dad's like, no, I didn't get hurt. Well, they found red blotches in the snow and wondered if somebody got hurt, and you were the last one, and nobody claims to have gotten injured last night. Oh, yeah, that was me. Well, what happened? And he says, well, we were carrying the candles like this, and that wax was hot. So every time I got a little pond of wax in the top of my candle, I'd pour it out. And I did that all the way over, pouring out the red wax, and it left red blotches in the snow all the way from the schoolhouse to here. That wax was hot. Thank you.
Oh, those candle stories. If any of these stories have sparked your memories and you'd like to share them, now is the time. And Steve will bring the microphone to you if you'd like to say something. Or if you'd like to add details that I don't have, I'm always happy to hear more about those.
I've got one. My daughter was being courted by this young man, and he came to our Christmas Eve ceremony, but he's a Hindu, and he came from India in 2006, and we embraced him so nicely, and he's dating this white girl. What's going to happen, right? And as we left, Grace held his hand as they came down the steps, just like she was his grandma. It was so sweet because, his parents were back in Asia. And then my husband turned to him and he says, well, are you ready to convert? And they both laughed hilariously, and they've gotten along great since.
Thank you.
She married him. Yeah.
Ah, yes.
She had 3 weddings.
This is not Christmas related, but having seen the picture of the wooden stairs leading up to the front door, I've heard from some people, I think Grace may have been one, that your dad worked on it, on the building the stairs. No? I've
It
heard.
was Carol's grandpa.
Yep. When was that done? I'm just wondering.
We have a picture downstairs of him and the church with the steps, but I don't know the year.
Okay, thank you.
They were supervising.
I don't know if it was maybe 1969 or 68. My father and I put the floor down in this church right here, plywood. I remember helping him put plywood down.
Well, I wonder about the pews here because I know that at some point in the 50s, Carol, the Couples Club took all of these pews, every last one of them, home and stained them and brought them back. So maybe they just had chairs to begin with.
This is not a story about this particular UU church, but in my prior UU church in Ann Arbor, which is where me and my daughter went for about 10 years before we came here, about, I don't know, long before Christmas that year, she had sworn, and she said, oh, Jesus Christ. And I sat her down and I explained to her that was one of the worst swear words that she could use because it offended many people's religions, not ours, but let's face it, we're surrounded by Christians in this world. And I said, we certainly, last thing we want to do is offend somebody else's religion. Well, Christmas came around in that UU church, and apparently she had been hearing that word Jesus a lot. And she was just aghast about how all of these sweet little old ladies in our church could be swearing like that. And so I had to do a little bit more explaining. It's hard to explain why it's swearing in one case and not in another. So that was fun.
Thank you. This church opened its doors in 1881, and we have never closed them. May we continue to keep our doors open, to honor the traditions of our beloved community, and to create new memories for our future.